So have you ever felt like no matter what you do, it's never enough for people? You try to do the right thing. You try to be better. You try to stay quiet or to explain yourself. But somehow, there is always something. A comment, a look, an opinion that makes you feel like you're not doing it right. And over time, that starts to stay with you. Not just outside, but inside. Before you begin to think about it even when no one is saying anything. You replay conversations. You question your actions. You wonder if people are judging you even in silence. And slowly, something shifts. You stop living freely and start living carefully. Not because you want to, but because you're trying to avoid criticism. Trying to avoid being misunderstood. Trying to avoid that uncomfortable feeling. But here is something most people don't realize. When you start living based on people's opinions, you slowly disconnect from your own direction. Because your focus changes. Instead of asking, "Am I doing what is right?" you start asking, "What will people think about this?" And that question can quietly control your life, not loudly, but consistently. Because the desire to be accepted is natural. It's human. So I see we all want to feel understood, respected, and seen, but when that desire becomes the center of your decisions, it becomes pressure, and pressure changes how you live. You begin to filter everything. What you say, what you do, how you act, even how you think. And little by little, you stop being led by conviction and start being led by perception. But perception is unstable because it changes. Ties from person to person, from moment to moment. What one person approves, another may criticize. What one person respects, another may question. So if you try to adjust yourself to everyone's opinion, you will lose clarity, because there is no stable direction in trying to please everyone. And this is where many people feel exhausted, not because they are doing too much, but because they are carrying too many expectations, or expectations that were never meant to define them. The Bible speaks clearly about this. In Galatians 1-10, it says, "Am I now trying to win the approval of human beings or of God?" That question is still relevant today, because the answer changes everything. If your direction comes from people, you will always feel unstable. But if your direction comes from God, you begin to find something different. Not perfection, but clarity. Typhus and clarity reduces pressure. Because now, Riekstein, you are not trying to satisfy everyone. You are trying to stay aligned. And that changes how you carry yourself. There is a reason people's opinions don't just stay outside. They don't just pass by. They enter. And once they enter, they begin to echo. Not because you are weak, but because you are human. The human mind is wired for connection. Gone from the beginning, acceptance meant safety, belonging meant survival, and rejection felt like danger. That wiring still exists today, even if your life is completely different now. So when someone criticizes you, your mind doesn't process it as a simple opinion. It processes it as something deeper, a signal, a potential threat to your place, your identity, your value. That is why it lingers. That is why it repeats. That is why it stays longer than it should. But there is something else happening beneath that. It's not just what people say, it's what it touches inside you. Sometimes a comment connects to an old insecurity, a past experience, a moment where you felt unseen or not enough. And when that connection happens, the reaction becomes stronger. Because now it's not just about the present. It's about everything that came before. This is why two people can hear the same comment and feel it differently. One moves on, the other carries it, not because one is stronger, but because it touched something deeper. And there is also a quieter layer, the desire to be understood, not just accepted, but seen correctly. So when someone misjudges you, it creates tension, because part of you wants to explain, try to correct, to be seen as you really are. But not everyone is willing to understand, and that can feel frustrating, even unfair. And slowly, you begin to carry not only what was said, but the need to fix how you were perceived. And that is exhausting, because now you are not just living your life, you are managing impressions, trying to control how others see you. But here is something that shifts everything. You were never meant to be understood by everyone, not because you lack clarity, but because people see through their own filters, their experiences, their expectations, their assumptions. And those filters shape their opinions, not your identity. This is where the spiritual perspective brings something powerful. In 1 Samuel 16:7 it says, "People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." That changes the reference point. Because now, you are not being defined by how you are perceived, but by what is true beneath the surface. And that truth you is not unstable. It does not change from person to person. So, when someone's opinion starts to feel heavy, it's not just about what they said. It's about where you are looking for definition. Because if you look outward, you will always feel uncertain. But if you begin to look from a deeper place, something shifts, not instantly, but steadily. When someone says something about you, you don't just hear it, you feel it. It lands somewhere inside, and sometimes it stays longer than it should. You replay it. You think about it. You analyze it. You're trying to understand if it's true. You're trying to decide what to do with it. And without realizing, you absorb it. Not just the words, but the weight behind them. And over time, this creates exhaustion, because you are carrying more than what belongs to you. But here is something important. Not everything that reaches you is meant to stay with you. Some things are meant to pass through, not to be stored, not to be carried, just noticed and released. But most people don't know how to do that, because they think, if I don't take this seriously, I'm ignoring it. Or, if I don't respond, I'm being weak. But not absorbing everything is not weakness. It is discernment. The ability to recognize what belongs to you and what does not. There is a simple shift that changes everything. Instead of immediately asking, is this true? You begin by asking, does this align with who I am and who I'm becoming? Because not every opinion deserves access to your inner space. Some opinions come from misunderstanding, some from projection, some from people who don't see clearly. And if you absorb all of them, you lose clarity. You start carrying confusion instead of direction. There is also something you need to understand. Protecting your heart does not mean closing it. It means filtering what enters. Not everything deserves your attention. Not everything deserves your emotional energy. The Bible speaks about this with clarity. In Proverbs 4:23 it says, guard your heart, not close your heart. Guard it. Therefore, because what enters your heart influences how you live. So when someone speaks, you don't have to absorb it immediately. You can pause, you can observe, you can decide, does this belong to me? And if it doesn't, you can let it go, without reacting, without carrying it, without letting it shape you. This does not make you distant, it makes you stable. Because now, you are not controlled by everything you hear. You are grounded in what is true, and that creates peace. There is something you may not have fully accepted yet. No matter what you do, someone will disagree. Not sometimes, always, because people don't see life the same way. They don't think the same. They don't value the same things. No, they don't carry the same experiences. To me, and those differences or shape how they judge. So even if your intention is right, someone may still misunderstand it. Even if your heart is in the right place, someone may still question it. Even if you are trying your best, someone may still criticize it. That doesn't mean you're wrong. It means you're human, living in a world full of different perspectives. The problem begins when you try to adjust yourself to all of them. Just because now, you're not just living your life. You are trying to satisfy multiple directions at the same time. And that creates confusion. Because one person wants one thing, another expects something different. And the more you try to meet both, the more you lose your center. This is where exhaustion grows, not from doing too much, but from trying to be too many things for too many people. But here is the shift. You were never meant to be understood by everyone, and you were never meant to be approved by everyone. Because approval from people is unstable. It changes. It fluctuates. It depends on mood, context, expectations. What pleases someone today may not please them tomorrow. So, if your peace depends on that, it will always feel uncertain. But when you accept that you cannot please everyone, something begins to relax inside you, because now you are no longer chasing an impossible standard. You are no longer trying to control every perception. You begin to focus on something deeper: integrity, alignment, truth. Not how it looks to everyone, but what it actually is. The Bible speaks about this with clarity. As in Proverbs 29:25, it says, "The fear of man will prove to be a snare, a trap, because it pulls your focus outward. It makes you depend on something unstable." But it continues, "But whoever trusts in the Lord is kept safe." That is the shift. From fear of opinion to trust in direction. From trying to be accepted to living with clarity. And when that shift happens, you don't become careless. You become grounded. Because now, your actions are not driven by reaction. They are driven by conviction. And conviction creates stability. It's one thing to understand that you can't please everyone. It's another thing to actually live that way. Because the pressure doesn't disappear overnight. Opinions still come. Comments still happen. And your mind still reacts. So the question becomes, how do you stay grounded in what truly matters? Not occasionally, but consistently. It begins with a shift in reference. Instead of looking outward for direction, you begin to look inward and upward, not based on emotion, but based on alignment. You start asking a different question. Is this aligned with what God is asking of me? Not, what will people think about this? Because those two questions lead to very different lives. One creates pressure. The other creates clarity. And clarity simplifies decisions. Not because everything becomes easy, but because your direction becomes defined. There is something important about living this way. And you will still be misunderstood sometimes. You will still be questioned. You may still be judged. But internally, you are no longer unstable. Because your decisions are not based on reaction. They are based on conviction. And conviction creates steadiness. This does not mean you ignore people completely. It means you don't depend on them for direction. There is a difference. You can listen, without absorbing everything. You can consider without losing yourself. You can reflect without being controlled. Because now your foundation is different. It is not built on shifting opinions. It is built on something stable. Jesus spoke about this kind of foundation. In Matthew 7, he describes two lives, one built on sand, one built on rock. The difference was not the storm. Both experienced it. The difference was the foundation. When your life is built on people's opinions, it feels like sand, unstable, shifting, unpredictable. But when your life is built on alignment with God, it becomes rock, steady, grounded, not easily shaken. That doesn't remove difficulty, but it changes how you stand in it. And over time, something becomes clear. Yes, you don't need everyone to understand you, to walk in the right direction. You don't need approval, to stay aligned. You don't need validation, to keep moving forward. Because when your direction is clear, your steps become lighter. It's one thing to deal with opinions from people who are distant. It's another thing entirely when it comes from someone close, someone you respect, someone you care about. Now to someone whose voice matters to you, because now it's not just an opinion, it feels personal, it reaches deeper, it stays longer. You don't just hear it, you carry it. And sometimes, it creates an internal conflict. Part of you wants to stay true to what you believe, but another part of you wants to be understood, accepted, not questioned. And when those two parts don't align, it creates tension. You begin to feel divided, not just between you and them, but within yourself. And that can be exhausting, because now you're not just dealing with the situation, you're dealing with the relationship, and relationships matter. They carry history, they carry emotion, they carry connection. So it becomes harder to simply let it go. But here is something important to understand. Someone being close to you does not mean they see clearly. Closeness does not guarantee understanding. Sometimes, people closest to you see you through expectations, through their own fears, through what they think your life should look like, not necessarily through what God is doing in you. And that creates a difference in perspective. They may speak from care, but also from limitation. And if you don't recognize that, you may begin to doubt what you know is right, not because it's wrong, but because it's being questioned by someone important. This is where clarity becomes essential. You can honor someone's view without agreeing with everything they say. You can respect someone without letting their opinion define you. You can listen to us without losing direction. Because honoring people does not mean abandoning yourself, and it does not mean stepping out of alignment. Even Jesus experienced this. There were moments when those closest to him did not understand him. They questioned him, they doubted him, but he did not change direction based on that. Because his alignment was not based on people, it was based on purpose. And purpose is not always understood by everyone around you, especially not immediately. So when criticism comes from someone close, You don't need to react quickly. You don't need to prove yourself. You don't need to fight to be understood. That you can pause. You can remain grounded. You can stay aligned, even if they don't see it yet. Because sometimes clarity is not something you explain. It's something you live. As, at some point, you begin to notice something. Even when you try to do everything right, people still talk. They still comment. They still form opinions. And sometimes, they don't stop. Not after you explain. Not after you adjust. Not even after you try to avoid conflict. And that can feel frustrating, because part of you expects, if I do the right thing, this should go away. But that expectation creates pressure, because now your peace depends on something you cannot control. What people say, what people think, how people interpret you. And the truth is, you cannot control that. Not fully, not consistently, not for everyone. So the question shifts again. Not, how do I make them stop? But, how do I stay steady even if they don't? Because peace is not found in controlling voices. It is found in choosing where you focus. Every time you replay what was said, you give it more space. Every time you try to correct every opinion, you give it more weight, and slowly, it begins to occupy your mind. Not because it's stronger, but because it's repeated. There is something important to understand here. Not every voice deserves your attention, and not every comment deserves your response. Silence is not weakness. It is selection. You are choosing what enters your inner space, and that choice protects your peace. Jesus demonstrated this clearly. There were moments when he was questioned, misunderstood, even accused. And sometimes, he responded. But other times, he remained silent. Not because he had nothing to say, but because not every situation required a response. That is wisdom. Knowing when to speak and when to remain still. Because constant reaction creates instability, but steady awareness creates peace. There is also a shift that helps protect your mind. Instead of focusing on what people are saying, you begin to focus on what is true. Not what is loud, not what is repeated, but what is real. Because truth does not need to be defended constantly. It remains, even when misunderstood. And when your mind is anchored in that, something changes. You stop reacting to every opinion. You stop chasing every correction. You begin to move with quiet confidence. Not loud, not defensive, but steady. And that steadiness creates a different kind of presence. One that is not easily shaken by noise. Change does not always feel dramatic. Most of the time, it feels quiet, almost unnoticeable. But if you look closely, there are signs. Small shifts that reveal something deeper is happening inside you. One of the first signs is this. You pause more before reacting. What used to trigger you immediately now creates a moment of space. Even if it's brief, that pause matters, because it shows you are no longer being controlled by every external voice. Another sign, you don't feel the need to explain yourself to everyone. Before, you wanted to correct every misunderstanding, to make sure people saw you clearly. But now, you begin to accept that not everyone will. And that acceptance brings peace. There is also a shift in how you process criticism. It no longer defines you instantly. You don't absorb everything. You evaluate. You filter. You decide what aligns and what doesn't. And that changes everything. Because now, you are not carrying what doesn't belong to you. Another quiet sign. You feel less pressure to prove yourself. Well, not because you stopped caring, but because your identity is no longer dependent on external validation. You begin to understand something. Your value is not something people decide. It is something you recognize, and that recognition brings stability. There is also a growing sense of peace, not constant, not perfect, but present, even in situations that used to overwhelm you. Thus, that peace does not come from everything being resolved. It comes from being grounded, from knowing where your direction comes from and where it does not. Another sign is this: you become more focused on how you live than on how you are perceived. Before, your attention was divided. Now, it is clearer. You care about alignment, about integrity, about truth, not just appearance. Alright, and that shift creates something powerful: consistency. Because now, you are not changing based on every opinion. You are becoming steady, and over time, that steadiness becomes your strength. Not loud, not forced, but real. There is something you can release today, not slowly, not partially, but intentionally. The need to be approved by everyone, not because people don't matter, but because they were never meant to define you. And maybe, without realizing it, you've been carrying that weight for a long time, adjusting yourself, filtering your actions, replaying what you said, trying to get it right in everyone's eyes. But there is no version of you that will satisfy every expectation, and chasing that will only keep you tired, because it's not a goal you can reach. It's a pressure you were never meant to carry. So instead of asking you, do they approve of me? You begin to ask, am I aligned with what is right? Not perfect, not flawless, but aligned. Because alignment creates peace, even when others don't understand, even when opinions don't change, even when voices remain. There is something steady that begins to form inside you. A quiet confidence, not loud. It's not defensive, but grounded. And that grounding changes how you move through life. You stop explaining everything. You stop reacting to everything. You stop carrying everything. And you begin to live with more clarity. Not because everything is resolved, but because you are no longer divided. Your direction is clearer. Your steps are lighter. And your peace is no longer dependent on people's voices. Because before you go, if you feel comfortable sharing, what opinion has been affecting you the most lately? Now, you can write just one word. Sometimes, that's where freedom begins.